Welcome back. Well, we have Jim Hopkins here in the studio, and he's going to give us a GRF update from the meeting they had last week, or I guess that was last week, right?
Yes, it was last week, May 2nd.
I know we make you get together all that information real quick, don't we?
Yeah, right.
So you were at the GRF meeting, and you are the treasurer, and so we appreciate you coming here today. So I'm just going to let you get started.
Sure, thank you, Lisa. Obviously, I'm the treasurer, so I'll probably highlight most of the financial issues, but we did do some more mundane work, which I'll lead off with. Right. But first, I want to recognize that we started off with some sad news, okay? One of a longtime resident and a longtime board member, not necessarily GRF, but Don Tibbetts passed away a couple of weeks ago. Right. And so we started off in a solemn note. Also, along with that, recently, we wanted to recognize the passing of Rose, Egon Gotthofner's wife, of 46 years. Wow. Okay. Egon did talk and made a tribute to her, and fortunate, and he seemed to be very upbeat as much as you can, because they had a celebration of life for her once they found out that she had a terminal illness. Okay. And so that was wonderful to hear. Also, another sad news was the passing of John Frankel on the third board. So we started off on a solemn note, and then we began with the more mundane activities that we had. Okay. So some of those mundane activities, this time we had some 28-day notice approvals that we had to make. And of course, these issues come on 28-day notice, okay, once we approve them. Okay. And so what was approved was some equestrian care service fees, there were some fee adjustments, and some added services, okay? And for those of you who are not familiar with the Equestrian Center, I encourage you to read the I think it's the May-June issue of The Breeze, but there's a wonderful article in there about the Equestrian Center, okay? Yeah,
they do a great job over there.
Fantastic job. And then on really some mundane issues we approved the appeal policy, and that is how you appeal to the board once you have been denied some privilege or something that you think you needed to have. Okay. There's an appeal process. And so I would encourage everyone to go in and take a look at that appeal process. That's on 28-day notice. Okay. Okay. And we changed that to align it with the third board. The third board has an appeal policy, which we thought was a great one. Okay. And so we aligned it there. All right. The other thing was the nuisance policy. We approved that, and that's on 28-day notice. Okay. And so you may want to ask, well, what's a nuisance policy? Right. And that pertains to those who violate the noise standards, odors, and violation of certain other laws. Okay. And so that's considered a nuisance. And so we put in, there's a policy in place for that. Okay. And there were some increases or slight adjustments, not increases, but I'm the treasurer, so I think of increases, okay. But some slight adjustments to that. And so it would be good to take a look at that. It is on 28-day notice. Okay. So anyone that has any updates or wants to change anything, you have 28 days to bring your concerns in. Okay. All right, again. And the other thing that is on 28-day notice is the harassment policy. Right. And so you may ask again, what is the harassment policy? Right. And I had to ask these same questions, by the way. And the harassment policy really is and I'll give you some examples of harassment: physical intimidation, stalking, unreasonable and hostile telephone calls, and I think disparaging remarks, and so on and so on. And so I think you get the idea of what harassment is. Right. And unfortunately, as the way the times are today, there is increasing levels of harassment among our residents. And so we have to define that policy and update it to make sure that we're up to speed with everything. All right. Okay. So with that, and then also a couple of other things is we installed some stop signs at the crosswalks of Sevilla and Mendoza. All right. That was requested by the residents in the area. At first it was denied, and then they did a traffic study and came back and said, yep, we think we ought to do that.
Okay.
Okay.
And I would assume people are just not stopping, so people can't walk across the street. Is that why they did that?
That's why, and the cars, it's a long stretch with a curve. And so what happens is a blind spot there when you go around that curve at Mendoza. And so what happens is, you don't see it, and if you're going too fast,
Yeah.
okay. So by putting a stop sign there, people get used to the fact that they're going to have to stop.
Okay.
All right, and so they slow down.
Is that one of the flashing stop lights?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Because I know there was some discussion that some of the stop signs were flashing.
Yes,
so.
there's a lot of discussion on that right now. Yes.
Okay. Well, fantastic. That's good to know. Oh, and hearing loop. Yay.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I don't know for the people who have hearing issues, hearing problems, the hearing loop allows them to actually connect to the audio system and an audio system so they can hear clearly.
Yeah.
I know our church just installed one, and those who are having hearing difficulties just think it's wonderful.
Yeah, they can hear everything without any noise.
Right.
Yep.
And the great thing about this is the Hearing Well Club is going to pay for the entire thing.
Nice.
Right,
And
yes.
that's a great organization. They bring a lot of awareness for folks.
Absolutely, absolutely. We have such a wonderful community. I think we take it for granted sometimes. We really do.
We forget how many goodies there are here.
Yes, yes. And
Now we're getting into your nut and bolt.
yeah, this is where I feel more comfortable.
Okay.
And the financial update, we had an audit, and we have an audit every year. Our auditors are KPMG, and they are one of the top 3 in the world. Right? So we're fortunate to have them, and at a reasonable price, by the way.
That's even better.
But I think we have to stop and realize sometimes that VMS is a $160 million not-for-profit organization. Right?
Wow.
I think we take that for granted again, all right? And if it were a profit organization, it'd be closer to 200 million. And so it's a huge process. So what our audit turned out to be is basically no problems, okay? Our accounting staff, which is a very small staff considering how large and diverse our services are. It's a fairly small staff, and they have roughly 700 transactions annually that they have to monitor within a process.
Okay.
So it's quite a task. So to have a clean audit,
700,000 transactions.
700,000 transactions.
That's a lot of transactions.
Yeah. And they're transactions, some are just accounting transactions, some are transactions with residents,
Right.
and all types of transactions.
Right.
So and that's how you measure the accounting load, if you will.
Okay.
So it's quite a task.
Right.
And
But
so,
you said there's only so many that really have a tight ship. Right? They're
Right.
running a tight ship to make sure everything runs
Yeah.
smoothly, especially if you have a company like KPMG come back and go, oh, there's no issues. That
Right.
seems unheard of.
Well, they normally have some issues,
Yeah.
not necessarily with us, but they normally have some issues. Some of the issues are just, tighten this up, tighten that up.
Okay.
But with us, they've been auditing us now for, I think, 4 or 5 years.
Oh, great.
Okay, and by the way, they change partners, they change audit staff.
Yeah.
They have, so there are some people that say, well, gee, if you have the same auditor, you have, possibility of collusion, et cetera. Well, they have peer reviews. They go outside. They have peer reviews within KPMG. They have peer reviews outside of KPMG. So they will review the audit and the integrity of the audit.
Good.
So there's a lot of checks and balances just because, people tend to doubt that.
Exactly.
They do not audit for fraud, theft, abuse, those kinds of things. All right? It's basically accounting. But if they discover something, and when you look at all of the processes, you can, if that's happening, you can discover those things.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Good. Good. Very thorough.
Okay. And then moving on to the financial report, as of March 31st, the operating fund bottom line was $607,000 better than budget. And most of that was due to personnel expense. Okay, that's about $546,000 below what was planned, and that's a function of staff turnover and the challenges in attracting and keeping employees.
Right.
All right, and that's a challenge for most companies today, and it's particularly difficult for us because of the our wage levels and types of jobs that we have. So it's a constant challenge, and I know the personnel folks in BMS are always looking for good people.
Okay, fantastic.
Okay.
And then you have about 32 million in your reserves.
Yes, we have $32 million reserves, and one of the things that people keep saying, hey, you need, what's a prudent investment? Okay, and of course our reserves are our investment in the future. Because what happens with our reserves is they are deposits that we make for future activities, such as rebuilding a building or buying equipment, vehicles, et cetera, et cetera. So when we buy something that's a long-term, like a vehicle, we immediately start saving for the replacement. And that's what the idea of a reserve. And if you really want to understand reserves in its entirety, the January-February issue of The Breeze, okay, had a wonderful article in there, written by a fellow by the name of Jim Hopkins. Okay.
Who's that?
But it does explain what reserves are, how we fund them, and what they're used for. We recently had a reserve, not an audit, but we had an outsider come in and review the GRF reserves and basically judge them as very, very low risk of a special assessment.
Right.
And that's normally what happens if you don't have enough reserves and something big comes up, you're subject to a special assessment.
Okay, perfect. And then we have a chart here that's the portfolio analysis.
Yeah, since there's been a lot of discussion on our investment portfolio over the last, say, 6 months, I thought I'd just take the time and spend maybe 3 or 4 minutes and take you through where we are, where we've been, and where we are.
Okay.
So back in December of 2019, we took our entire portfolio and invested in mostly Treasury bond funds, okay? And those bond funds through 2020 and then 2021 were actually increasing in value. And the Federal Reserve decided they would go in and start raising interest rates. The interest rates rose faster than at any time in our country's history. Now, bond funds are a little different in that they're bonds within a fund. So you can't just change them out instantly because it takes a little time for them to mature. Keep in mind, all of this time, even though the value goes down, the yield, which is the interest rate, we're still generating interest on that.
Right.
So back in 2020, we stopped reinvesting our interest income into reinvesting it into the bond funds because their value were coming down.
Right.
So we put the cash to the side.
Got it.
But then in 2022, we reached a low, okay, in our bonds, and then they've been rising ever since. We then engaged in a different strategy. And on this next page, we'll tell you what that strategy has been. So what happened is in 2022, in October. And by the way, we've been working with Sageview, our investment advisor, on all of these strategies.
Okay.
And we realized that once we missed the opportunity to get out of bond funds when the interest rates rose so quickly, we had to ride it out. Okay?
Yeah.
And at a certain point, the bond funds start to come back.
Okay.
And they actually come back faster than the interest rate because, I know it's complicated, but they actually come back faster because we're talking about market value, not the interest rate value.
Got
And
it.
so the combination of the two will propel the increase in market value faster than the yield, which is the interest rate, for a period of time.
Okay.
So we reached a low in October.
Yeah.
Right? And that was $17,780,000. And of course, if you look at so back then, under the advice of our investment advisor, he said, it's coming back. It's reached its low. He said, each fund, and there were 5 funds, each fund has a different profile. When each fund has reached its optimum in terms of its return to normalcy, okay, we'll get out and move into treasuries, short-term treasuries. And so we said, fine. He came back with that suggestion. We said, it's in your hands. And so rather than wait till the end of the month, once review, we said, you take it and you run with it. So that's what he's been doing. So at this point, we're all in treasuries. Okay?
And is that correct in seeing that it's 9.4% annual?
Yeah, well, what happened is in the 6 months that when we started the strategy, it's actually been 7 months now, but in the 6 months since we started the strategy, we've increased our portfolio balance by $838,000. Had we sold the entire portfolio when we were actually encouraged to by some, we would have only made $356,000 doing that. That's an opportunity loss of $482,000.
Yeah.
And once you lose that opportunity, you can't get it back.
Yeah.
So the strategy that our advisor put us on allowed us that opportunity to gain $482,000.
You know, sometimes we take fear, right? We're like, oh no, you know, what if it goes lower, right? And then, but you actually wrote it out, which was really smart. And here you guys are, well beyond what you thought it would be.
Well, we followed the advice of the professionals.
Sometimes that's a good thing, right?
Yes.
Well, fantastic. That's great news. Great news.
So now the other committee, one of the other committees I'm on is the Information Technology Advisory Committee, and that's commonly called ITAC. Okay. And that's to install our ERP system, which is our Enterprise Resource Planning System.
Okay.
And we used to call it Business Management System, but basically, it's the underpinning. Most people don't see it; they see the results of it. And I say that it's kind of like our circulatory system and our nervous system. We don't see it, but when it's not operating, we see the results of it. But when it's operating well, we take it for granted. Right? So we've been working on that, and it's a lot of work. It won't be done until I think end of 2024, maybe into 2025. But it's pieces that we're working on pieces. Right now, it's the finance piece, finance, warehousing, et cetera, all of those things associated with that.
Wow, that's a big.
And we'll start to see results of that.
Right.
The first one in about 3 to 5 months.
Oh, okay. All right, fantastic.
And then other issues, obviously the big talk has been the room fees, and we do have an advisory committee that's going to be working on the room fees. And what we're discovering is there's been some inconsistencies over the last few years since 2011 and how we develop those rates, et cetera. So we're working on first making sure that we understand what has happened in the past, look at the level of consistency, and then from there move forward. So there's going to be it's going to be a little bit longer to actually get the results than we had anticipated. But we want to get it right, because once we do it right, it should last us for the rest of whatever periods are.
Well, you know, I mean, so many things have increased in costs, right? And just to maintain some of those rooms and that kind of thing. So certainly understandable.
See, all of the above. And the rate structure.
And then a big, huge one is broadband, which we know a lot about.
Yes, you know a lot about. Well, broadband as we know it, think of it as cable, okay? And if you've been reading the news, I mean, cable TV and the purchase of programming is now moving, most of it is moving towards something called streaming, which you get over the internet. And so how does that impact us? I mean, many people don't know. We actually own our own cable company here, okay? And we bought it some time ago. So when you move into streaming, the internet, it takes on a whole different level, a whole different business model. So we're looking at that as to how we will adapt ourselves to the new business model, and how it's going to impact the residents, which is most important. So that's a toughie, and we've got a special advisory committee on that.
Oh yeah. And then what's the space utilization for Building E look like?
Well, Building E is the old security building, okay, and there was a lot of things there, but the building was old and was essentially falling apart.
Right.
So we had to get the employees out of there. So right now they're in leased space. But the GRF board recommended rebuilding Building E. And as we went through the process, other ideas came up, such as making better use of the community center, et cetera. So we decided to step back, take a look at that, look at all of the opportunities. And so we're in the process of doing that now. Okay, and we'll be getting some results fairly soon. Good. So that we can start making some decisions.
All right. Well, That was a very thorough report. We appreciate all of that information that you've provided.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. If you want more information about anything that we have discussed, you can always send an email with your question to generalmanager@vmsinc.org, and we will send it off to the appropriate person. We'll be right back.